Hello and welcome to Across Africa, your 7-day roundup of news from across the continent. Coming up for you in this week's programme. Celebrations break out across Zimbabwe as Robert Mugabe finally resigns. Under massive pressure, the 93-year-old president steps down to allow a smooth and peaceful transfer of power. A year after Cameroon's Anglophone crisis began, we bring you a special report about the growing calls for the creation of a new state called Ambazonia. And we take a closer look at what life's like for gay men and women living in Nigeria. This as 40 people stand trial charged with committing homosexual acts. But first, the curtain has finally come down on the 37-year rule of Robert Mugabe. A few days after the army staged a takeover, the Zimbabwean president has finally caved into pressure from the military, from his own party and from the streets, and announced his resignation. Onka Ula takes a look back at the life of the leader dubbed the Grand Old Man of African politics.
From teacher to freedom fighter, Robert Mugabe's rise to power changed the face of Zimbabwe. Mugabe made his political debut in the 1960s. In what was then the British colony of Rhodesia. His goal, to overthrow the discriminatory colonial system.
The Europeans in the country must regard themselves as citizens of the country, and they count only for one. Each of them counts for one.
The stage was set for a violent uprising against Ian Smith's white colonial government, and Mugabe was thrown in jail for 10 years over a so-called subversive speech. On his release, he became the leader of the guerrilla movement fighting against the white minority rule. In 1980, Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, and Mugabe, dubbed the Liberator, was named Prime Minister of the independent country. 7 years later, he became president. Initially seen as a moderate, Mugabe soon crushed dissent among the minority Ndebele people. It's estimated that between 10 and 20,000 were killed. Meanwhile, his economic policies plunged one of Africa's richest countries into crisis.
He allowed the worst of any economic policy to flower when he, spent far too much money perhaps on education and health and so on. Didn't develop the productive capacity of Zimbabwe.
In the 1990s, he launched a land reform program, redistributing the property of thousands of white farmers. He claimed to be righting colonial wrongs, but the policy sent harvests plummeting, causing major food shortages. Political opposition increased, and a 2000 referendum to expand the powers of the presidency was voted down. Mugabe's re-election in 2002 was dogged by accusations of vote rigging and intimidation. But he came closest to losing power in 2008. His challenger, Morgan Tsvangirai, won a larger share of the first round of voting, but withdrew from the second round, citing widespread violence against his supporters. Pressured by regional allies, Mugabe agreed to share power. Recently, an internal power struggle has erupted as the 93-year-old leader's health declines. On November 6, Mugabe sacked a favored successor, Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, for showing traits of disloyalty. The move angered the army, formerly close allies of the president, and as military tanks descended on Harare, the stage was set for a fresh political showdown.
Well, with many Zimbabweans taking to the streets to celebrate Mugabe's departure, others have been reflecting on the man who's set to fill his shoes. The chief whip of the ruling ZANU-PF party says that Emmerson Mnangagwa is set to be sworn in at the National Sports Stadium in the capital, Harare. He fled the country early this month after being sacked by Mugabe. Let's take a closer look now at the man often referred to as the crocodile.
He started as Mugabe's student. Now Emmerson Mnangagwa is set to become Zimbabwe's next president. His impact on the country's history began in his teens, when he fought against white minority rule in what was then known as Rhodesia. He trained in China in the 1960s and orchestrated attacks in Rhodesia in order to help his country gain independence. Mnangagwa spent several years in jail, where he met Mugabe and later became his assistant and bodyguard. When Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, Mnangagwa was appointed as security minister, a time which saw him foster close ties with his military and security forces. In 1983, when he was security minister, The army set out on a bloody campaign in the provinces of Matabeleland and Midlands. As many as 30,000 opposition supporters and their family members were killed. But Mnangagwa denies any involvement in the massacres. Throughout the years, he has held many positions, and in 2008 he was accused of rigging votes in favour of Mugabe in that year's presidential election. He was also seen as being the mastermind behind election violence that swept the country. Nicknamed the Crocodile due to his reputation for ruthlessness, Emmerson Mnangagwa still enjoys wide support within the military and security communities.
Moving on, it's now a year since Cameroon's Anglophone crisis flared and the situation still remains tense. The 20% of the country that is English-speaking fear that their way of life is progressively being taken over by Francophone practices. After weeks of deadly unrest, many activists are now calling for ties to be cut and an independent state of Ambazonia to be set up. Liane de Bassompierre and Patrick Fondiot report.
Nestled in the high valleys of northwestern Cameroon, Kumbo is one of the strongholds of the English secessionist movement, calling for the creation of a state baptized Ambazonia. Erasmus Dinker is one of the activists of this movement. He was shot and injured, like dozens of others, during pro-independence protests.
I have the bullet for my arm, penetrated through the chest and came out behind my back. That's where they shoot me. What I'm sitting here now like this, I was not able to pay the bill. That's why they keep me here.
He barely survived the operation, yet he's still determined to protest again to defy power and demand independence.
We are going out the street and fight for our own benefit, fight for our freedom. That's what we need. And we cannot be afraid until we have it.
Ambazonia's name derived from Ambas Bay, a colony founded in 1858 by British missionaries led by Alfred Saker. A territory today claimed by the separatists like this elderly activist who dreams of making it an English-speaking country.
There are these flags all over in my own house. This is the flag of the Southern Cameroons. A great flag indeed. It is a symbol of the new country, Ambazonia. I am of this nation.
The separatists are already thinking of establishing their capital here in Buea, one of two main cities in the English-speaking regions of the country.
Well, in response to Cameroon's independence movement, the government's communication minister has spoke to France 24. He described the movement as being a terrorist one, but added that separatists were still part of the country. Take a listen.
This is the most heinous, the most hated action against our nation. So what is it? It is a terrorism. What is the state is going to do to take any necessary measure in order to prevent this from really taking place? But as I said, they remain sons and daughters of this nation. Let them come back.
And finally, we take you to Nigeria, where 40 men, including 12 minors, face up to 14 years each behind bars. And their alleged offence is committing homosexual acts. In the staunchly religious and conservative country, the gay community has long lived in fear and in the shadows with strict laws against homosexuality. Many are also harassed by internet fraudsters who post fake profiles on gay dating sites.
2 years ago, Daniels was locked in a van and threatened by police as he walked down a Lagos street. The reason? His feminine look. The experience shook him up and he decided to change his appearance to be less conspicuous.
I was flamboyant, you know. And then after the incident, I made some modifications. Just a little though. I let my beard grow out. Then I was always cut it. I loved my androgynous look. I love the fact that I walk past you and you're like, is this a boy or a girl? But now, you cannot help but know that I'm a guy.
Nigeria outlawed gay marriage and same-sex unions in 2014, reinforcing existing laws against homosexuality. With the risk of up to 14 years in jail, gay people have been forced into the shadows. Even on dating apps and websites, there's the risk of fake profiles created by the police and extortionists. Walter launched a website for gay people to exchange warnings about which profiles to avoid.
We keep encouraging people, when you go through something, there's a tendency to shrink and internalize the pain and be too embarrassed to talk about it. We tell them, no, don't. Bring your story to us. It serves the purpose of letting other people know.
Some gay people have fled Nigeria to avoid harassment, not just from the authorities, but from their families in what is a deeply religious country. For the majority left behind in Nigeria, there's no choice but to live with the risks.
Right now, everybody knows that there are LGBT folks in this country, and that is what we want. We want you to know that we exist. We're here, we're queer, and we're here to stay.
No one has yet been convicted under the 2014 laws. All eyes are now on the courts, as those arrested earlier this year have their cases heard at the end of November.
That brings us to the end of this week's edition of Across Africa. Do stay with us here on France 24.